December 15th, 1984, 5:45 a.m. A man walks out to his driveway and finds a teenage girl's body in the snow. Under her fingernails, the killer's DNA. The problem? Science couldn't read it yet. The body lay partially nude in the pre-dawn darkness of Grafton, Wisconsin. Blood spattered the snow. Blood streaked the bark of nearby trees. The temperature hovered just below freezing, preserving everything. The horror of the scene, the evidence of a brutal struggle, and most importantly, microscopic traces of the man who had done this. Investigators collected it all. Semen from the rape, blood from beneath her nails where she'd clawed at her attacker in those final desperate moments. They had him. They had his genetic signature, his biological fingerprint, the irrefutable proof of his identity locked inside those samples. But 1984 might as well have been the Stone Age when it came to DNA technology. They could preserve it. They could store it. They couldn't decode it. There was no national database to search, no genetic genealogy, no way to translate what those cells were screaming into a name, an address, a face. So the evidence went into a freezer, and 18-year-old Tracy Hammerberg went into the ground, and her killer went back to his life. 35 years. That's how long Tracy's family waited for answers. That's how long her killer thought he was safe. Before we dive into this case, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now and what time is it where you are? I love seeing our crime scene community spread across the world. This is the story of how science became a time machine, how evidence refused to die, and how a teenage girl who fought for her life in 1984 finally got to name her murderer in 2019. Tracy Lynn Hammerberg was 18 years old in the winter of 1984. She was a senior at Port Washington High School, the kind of teenager you'd see at every party, every football game, every late-night gathering at the local diner. She had moved to Saukville with her family when she was 10, and by 18, she knew every back road, every shortcut, every familiar face in town. December 14th started like any other Friday night. Tracy babysat for a family in Saukville, pocketing some cash before heading out around midnight to meet friends at a grocery store parking lot. They piled into a car and drove to Quade's Tavern in Port Washington, a local spot where everyone knew everyone. Later, the group moved to a house party in Grafton. Music, laughter, a drinking game. Someone passed around marijuana. Just another night of being young in small-town Wisconsin, where the biggest worry was getting home before your parents woke up. But here's what Tracy didn't know as she laughed with her friends that night. She had roughly 12 hours left to live. Around 12:30 a.m., she decided to head home. The party was winding down, and she had a straight shot back to Saukville, 3.7 miles along Wisconsin Highway 33. It wasn't an unusual decision. She'd walked it before. In 1984, in a place like this, hitchhiking wasn't reckless. It was normal. Everyone picked up everyone. Trust was currency in towns like Grafton. So Tracy started walking. Alone, in the dark, along a highway where cars came and went with their headlights cutting through the December cold. Has someone you know ever walked home alone at night thinking they were safe? Drop a comment below. At 5:45 a.m., Dan Siraki left his house on Maple Road to start his day. He made it as far as his driveway before his headlights landed on something that would haunt him forever. A young woman, partially nude, lying in the snow. The scene told a story investigators didn't need words to understand. Tracy had been raped, strangled, bludgeoned with something heavy and metallic. Blood soaked the snow around her. Blood marked the trees as though she'd been thrown or dragged. Her body bore the evidence of a fight. She hadn't gone quietly. And then there were the cigarette butts. Marlboro Reds, several of them scattered near her body like breadcrumbs from a killer too arrogant or too stupid to care. Tracy didn't smoke Marlboros. She smoked menthols. Those butts belonged to someone else. 2 hunters in the area reported something else. Something that would stick with investigators for decades. Just before dawn, they'd seen a car speeding away from Maple Road. No headlights, just a dark shape racing into the disappearing night, as though the driver knew exactly what he was running from. Tracy Hammerberg had walked into the dark and never came out. Somewhere along Highway 33, she'd crossed paths with a monster. The Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office launched what would become the largest DNA testing effort in Wisconsin's history. This wasn't a small-town investigation anymore. This was all hands on deck. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit joined in. The Wisconsin Department of Justice sent their best. Detectives knocked on hundreds of doors, interviewed anyone who'd been at that party, anyone who'd driven Highway 33 that night, anyone who'd ever known Tracy. They cast the widest net possible. Then they went further. Over 400 men in the area voluntarily gave blood and saliva samples. 400. That's not a handful of suspects. That's an entire community saying, "Test me. Prove it wasn't me." One by one they were tested. One by one they were cleared. Every promising lead turned cold. Every theory hit a dead end. The case file grew thicker with reports, interviews, lab results, all of it adding up to nothing. Here's the thing that makes this case so heartbreaking. The investigators did everything right. They collected the evidence properly. They preserved it meticulously. They had the killer's semen from the rape. They had his blood from beneath Tracy's fingernails pulled free when she fought back. They had him. But having his DNA in 1984 was like having a treasure map written in a language that wouldn't be invented for another 30 years. Think about it this way. You have the killer's fingerprint, but there's no database to compare it to. You have his face on camera, but no facial recognition software exists. You have the answer to the test, but you can't read the handwriting. DNA profiling was barely a concept. CODIS, the National DNA Database, wouldn't exist until 1998. And even then, it would only contain samples from convicted criminals. If this killer had never been caught for another crime, his DNA would never be in the system, so the evidence went into a climate-controlled storage facility, carefully labeled, perfectly preserved, waiting. The detectives moved on to other cases, but they never forgot. New investigators came in, pulled the file, read through it, hoped they'd see something everyone else had missed. They didn't. The answer wasn't hiding in the witness statements or the crime scene photos. It was hiding in a freezer, encoded in molecules too small to see. If you're finding this case as fascinating as I am, hit that subscribe button. We cover cold cases like this every week. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. While that evidence sat frozen in time, somewhere else, a family was trapped in a nightmare that never ended. No closure, no answers. Just an empty chair at the dinner table and a question that echoed through every holiday, every birthday, every quiet moment. Who killed our daughter? For Tracy's parents, Judy and Harlan, and her sister Lori, December 15th, 1984, wasn't just the day they lost Tracy. It was the day time stopped. Every Christmas after that came with an empty chair. Every year, Tracy stayed 18 while they kept aging. Birthdays she'd never celebrate. Graduations she'd never attend. Grandchildren she'd never hold. The math of grief is cruel. One day of violence equals a lifetime of loss. But worse than the grief was the not knowing. Who did this? Was it someone they'd passed in the grocery store? Someone who sat next to them at church? A neighbor? A stranger? The killer had a name, a face, a life, and they had nothing. Just questions that burrowed deeper with every passing year. Does he know who we are? Is he watching us? The entire community felt it. Saukville, Grafton, Port Washington. These weren't big cities where you could disappear into anonymity. These were towns where everyone knew everyone. And in 1985, just 1 year after Tracy's murder, another young woman, Wendy Smith, Tracy's friend and classmate, was also found dead. Murdered. Was it the same killer? Investigators looked for connections. They found none. But that didn't stop the whispers. The fear. The constant gnawing anxiety that a predator was still out there hunting. Sheriff Jim Johnson, who joined the department in 1991, said the Hammerberg case was a constant presence, a ghost that haunted every detective who walked through those doors. It was the case everyone knew about, the one no one could solve, the one that felt personal, even to investigators who'd never met Tracy. Detectives retired, new ones took over the file. They'd read through it, hoping for something. Anything that previous eyes had missed. They found nothing new. The same dead ends. The same wall. The same maddening reality. They had the evidence, but the science wasn't there yet. This wasn't just an March 2019. 35 years after Tracy's murder, the game changed completely. Forensic genetic genealogy had just made global headlines. The Golden State Killer, a monster who'd terrorized California for decades, had been identified using a revolutionary technique that combined DNA analysis with public genealogy databases. Cold case investigators across the country were paying attention. If it worked for him, it could work for others. The Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office pulled Tracy's case file from storage. Those decades-old DNA samples, still perfectly preserved, were sent to a private lab. Scientists extracted a full genetic profile from the killer's DNA, not just markers or fragments, everything. That profile was uploaded to public genealogy databases like GED Match and MyHeritage. These are the same sites people use to find distant relatives or trace their ancestry. Millions of users, millions of DNA profiles. Somewhere in that digital ocean of genetic data, the killer's family tree was waiting to be found. They didn't get a direct hit, but they got something better, a match to the killer's second cousin. Now the real detective work began. The Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office partnered with the FBI's Forensic Genetic Genealogy team out of Los Angeles, specialists who could build family trees the way architects design skyscrapers. They started with that second cousin match and worked backward through generations. Parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, 4 generations back, then forward again, mapping out every branch of the family tree. Every male relative in the right age range became a potential suspect. Where were they in 1984? Did they live in Wisconsin? Could they have been on Highway 33 that night? The list started with dozens of names. The genealogists eliminated them one by one, cross-referencing geography, age, timelines. The circle tightened. August 28, 2019, the team landed on one name, Philip J. Cross. The investigators had never heard of him. He'd never been a suspect, never been interviewed, never given a DNA sample during that massive testing effort in the 80s. He was a ghost in the investigation, but not because he was careful, because he was lucky. They started digging into Philip Cross's background. Every detail that came back felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. He lived in Grafton in 1984, right where Tracy's body was found. He worked second shift at a local plastics factory, 4 p.m. to midnight. His shift ended right around the time Tracy left that party. His drive home, straight down Highway 33, the exact route Tracy was walking. And Philip Cross was a heavy smoker. His brand, Marlboro Reds. Before I tell you what they found next, do me a favor. Hit that like button if you think forensic genealogy is one of the most incredible tools in modern crime solving. And drop a comment. Should this technology be used in all cold cases? But here's the problem. Philip Cross was dead. He'd died of a drug overdose in 2012, 7 years before investigators identified him. Except, and this is where fate stepped in, when Cross died, the medical examiner had preserved a DNA card during his autopsy. Standard procedure. That card was still in storage. The Wisconsin State Crime Lab ran the comparison. The DNA from Cross's autopsy. The DNA from under Tracy Hammerberg's fingernails. Perfect match. After 35 years, Tracy's killer finally had a name. Philip J. Cross wasn't some ordinary guy who snapped once and made a terrible mistake. His life was a decades-long trail of violence, chaos, and cruelty. His criminal record started young, bomb threats as a teenager, car theft, escalating into a pattern that would define his adult life. Drug abuse, domestic violence, forgery, prison time. He bounced in and out of the system like it was a revolving door, each offense a little worse than the last. In 1991, 7 years after Tracy's murder, Cross was accused of strangling a woman with his belt. The details were horrifyingly familiar. A man with a temper, a violent outburst, a woman fighting for her life. People who knew him described him as angry, volatile, abusive. The kind of person you avoided if you were smart. Investigators believe the scenario that night in 1984 was tragically straightforward. Cross, driving home from his midnight shift, saw Tracy walking alone on Highway 33. He pulled over, offered her a ride. In a small town in the 80s, she probably didn't think twice about it. But when he made advances, when she said no, his rage took over. What happened next was brutal and fast. Rape, strangulation, bludgeoning. He dumped her body in the first place he could find, Dan Siraki's driveway on Maple Road. Then he sped off into the darkness with his headlights off, like he could outrun what he'd just done. Here's the part that stings the most. Philip Cross lived a full life. He woke up every morning for 28 years after killing Tracy. He had relationships. He smoked his Marlboros. He committed more crimes, hurt more people, and walked free more times than he should have. Tracy Hammerberg got 18 years. That's it. He stole everything else. And he died in 2012 without ever knowing they'd found him. No arrest, no interrogation, no moment where someone looked him in the eye and said, "We know what you did." Sheriff Jim Johnson put it best. He was able to live a full life, where Tracy was not. We became her voice when she could no longer speak. I know what you're thinking. It feels incomplete, doesn't it? No trial, no courtroom confession, no justice in the traditional sense, just a name attached to a decades-old crime. But here's the thing. This is justice. For 35 years, Tracy's family lived in the dark, haunted by questions that had no answers. Now they know. They know who. They know why. They know it wasn't random, and they know Tracy fought back hard enough to leave the evidence that would eventually expose him. That's not nothing. That's everything. Tracy Hammerberg's case isn't just a story about a murder that got solved. It's a story about time, science, and the refusal to let evil win. For 35 years, her family lived in a prison of unanswered questions. For 35 years, detectives carried the weight of a case they couldn't close. For 35 years, Tracy's voice was silent, but it was never gone. That's the lesson here. Evidence never lies, and it never forgets. It just waits. Every fiber, every cell, every microscopic trace left behind at a crime scene is a time capsule. It doesn't decay if it's preserved properly. It doesn't change its story. It just sits there patiently, waiting for the day when science catches up and someone finally knows how to listen. In 1984, forensic genetic genealogy didn't exist. DNA databases didn't exist. The tools that would eventually solve this case hadn't even been imagined yet. But the investigators back then did their jobs anyway. They collected the evidence. They stored it properly. They trusted that someday, somehow, it would matter. And it did. Now think about how many cases are sitting in evidence rooms right now, waiting for that same breakthrough. How many families are living the way Tracy's did, stuck in 1984 or 1992 or 2003, waiting for a knock on the door that says, "We finally know." This technology exists now. It's solving cases that were considered unsolvable. The Golden State Killer, the boy in the box. Dozens of Jane and John Does finally getting their names back. And it's only going to get better. But here's what makes Tracy's case so powerful. She solved her own murder. When Philip Cross attacked her that night, she didn't go quietly. She fought. She clawed at him, ripping his skin, trapping his blood under her nails. In her final moments, terrified and fighting for her life, Tracy Hammerberg left behind the one piece of evidence that would, 35 years later, bring him to justice. She never stopped fighting, not even after she was gone. That's the kind of strength that deserves to be remembered. That's the kind of courage that should never be forgotten. If this case moved you, please share it. Share it because Tracy's story deserves to be told. Share it because there are families still waiting for answers just like hers. And subscribe to Crime Scene because every week we're giving voice to victims who can no longer speak for themselves. Tracy Hammerberg waited 35 years to tell us who killed her. Her family waited 35 years to finally have a name, a face, a reason. The detectives waited 35 years to close a case that haunted them. In the end, she never stopped fighting, and neither did the people who refused to forget her.